It's Wisconsin Today. I'm Rob Farrett.
And I'm Kate Archer-Kent. Search operations continue for people lost in the catastrophic flash floods along the Guadalupe River in Texas earlier this month. The treasured waterway that winds through Texas Hill Country is a special place for outdoor lovers.
This natural disaster raises questions about safety here in Wisconsin. Our state park system includes dozens of state parks, over 500 boat launches, and thousands of campsites. So what safety measures are in place to help reduce flood risk and the threat from extreme weather?
To learn more, we turn to Missy Van Landit, Recreation Partnerships Section Chief at the Department of Natural Resources. Missy, welcome back to Wisconsin Today.
Thank you for having me.
What comes up for you as you see the aftermath of this tragedy and the rescue and recoveries in Texas and a death toll that continues to climb?
Yeah, it's so heartbreaking to see that. And, I've had about 15 years experience working on natural disasters in Wisconsin on state-owned lands, and it certainly hits home. I also was personally involved in the 2018 flood and stranded in waters for about 8 or 10 hours. So it certainly hits very close to home. And as someone who works for the state park system, every time across the state there is a thunderstorm warning or a flash flood watch or a tornado watch, it's something all of our ears kind of perk up, and we're become acutely aware of the weather and what's going to be going on over the next several hours when those warnings and watches come out.
How prepared are Wisconsin state parks for a torrential rain that causes flash floods?
I think we're as prepared as we can be. We have a lot of measures that we put in place regarding like our infrastructure. And so we do twice annual designated use inspections. And so we look at things like our culverts and our dams, and we monitor those and inspect those, including our bridges and towers, and all things like that are routinely inspected to ensure that they're clear and operating properly. We have measures in place to indicate when we have closures on our properties, and our staff are certainly weather aware, and that's something that we continue to always tell our visitors to be prepared when you come to our properties and to just be aware of your surroundings in general. But, for the most part, we really don't. We don't necessarily have like storm shelters and things like that, but we do inspect our buildings and we do inspect our infrastructure to ensure that they can function as designed and as built.
When you say weather aware, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, and I think in Wisconsin in particular, we certainly rely on our cell phones and weather radios where we can to be aware of what the weather is. I think, we're similar to other states in that the weather can change pretty rapidly. And so we're always looking at our phones and we're checking the radar and we're looking at what the forecast is going to be, whether that's because we want to know if we're going to make that camping trip this weekend or will it be rained out, or whether or not we need to prepare in other ways as we make our adventures out on the weekends or even during the week. And so we always remind, our visitors to have a weather radio, primarily because we have a lot of properties that don't have great cell service. And so that's one of the best ways that you can be prepared is to have a weather radio with you. We also remind people that the outdoors is not something that should inhibit what you do depending on the weather. And so we always remind people to not only bring sunscreen and insect repellent, but we remind people to have adequate and safe footwear and to dress in layers and to know where their surroundings are. And in addition to that, to tell people where they're going so that if there is a weather event or other type of event, that you have safety measures in place, whether you're out for a hike alone or you're camping alone or with your family, but so that people know where you are if you can't get in touch with others.
And we have such beautiful waterways here in Wisconsin and, campsites along the way. Are there particular state parks that are more at risk for dangerous flooding due to their locations?
It's something that's so hard to predict. We do have a number of campsites that are along the water, like you said. We do routinely deal with flooding at Merrick State Park. Now, that doesn't tend to be really flashy, at least not that we've seen in the last, 20 plus years where it's a really fast rise and a really fast fall. We do generally have, just because of the backwaters of the Mississippi, we do have campsites that are pretty much closed every spring at Merrick State Park. But we always remind people that, just like what happened in Texas, our meteorologists in the country can predict the weather the best they can, but you just never know how things will perform. And, even in some of the last several natural disasters that we had, we prepare ourselves in the way that we record any damage. We prepare for that to be a natural disaster in that way, meaning you never know what any one of these storms is going to turn out. So how we react to that on the, in the after elements of that and how we repair damage and things like that, we're always prepared for what that might be. And, we're very thankful. We really haven't had any significant natural disasters, knock on wood, since 2018. But we did have several almost annually between 2013 and 2018 that resulted in either tornado damage or flood damage.
We're talking about the safeguards in parks and campgrounds throughout Wisconsin following the catastrophic flash floods in Texas. Missy Van Landet is with us, Recreation Partnerships Section Chief for the Wisconsin DNR. And Missy, I want to make sure we're clear on this. In Texas, they're looking at installing emergency siren systems. We don't have those in our state parks. Is that right?
That is correct. We do not.
Okay. And then in terms of the state park staff at these state parks, what is their role in being not only weather aware, but perhaps helping get the word out as these state parks, as the weather changes? What are they trained to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, like you said, we have about 6,500 campsites, and on average, there are between 4 and 6 individuals on any one of those campsites. So that can result in, 15,000 plus people being on our campsites at any one time. And we have, about 500 staff. So there's not a ton of staff to be able to go around and warn people. So that's really why we continue to share, both seasonally and as elements come up. If we know that there's severe weather predicted, if we're seeing people out and about or campers that are coming in, we'll remind them to be weather aware and remind them to have their weather radios ready and out. We don't have the capacity to go around and warn everyone. And sometimes these incidents happen during times of day when there aren't staff on the property. And so that's why it's incredibly important for people to be prepared and to know what the forecast is indicating and to have those weather radios. Now, there are some times it's pretty rare, but there are some times when weather does happen and we have volunteers or our law enforcement partners or our staff that are able to share that, but that's really not consistent, especially given the number of staff that we have and the times that some of these weather events happen.
The DNR has grappled with a backlog of maintenance projects for years. Last year, that number exceeded $1 billion on state properties. I'm wondering if a natural disaster strikes a state park, could the ongoing maintenance backlog present further risks and challenges?
Absolutely. It hits, a natural disaster hits us twofold because our operating budget, we're a self-funded system, so we rely solely on admission and camping. And so when we have to address a natural disaster, that's not something that we're able to budget for. And so if our staff are cleaning up, even most recently with rains and storms, we always have down trees, we always have washouts, minor in most cases, but that is not something that we are able to budget for in excess. And so it hits our operating budget during that time. And then in the other side of things, when we do have major damage to buildings or infrastructure like dams or bridges or culverts, that certainly does add to our backlog. And then what happens is we need to defer other projects in order to address these things. So Pattison Dam is a really great example. That one was damaged in, I believe, 2017. And we're still in the process of finishing up the design on that and getting it replaced. And so it does certainly affect and delay our ability to complete property operations and to address that backlog across the state.
Governor Evers, having signed a new 2-year budget earlier this month, are there any items in that new state budget that might help state parks be better equipped to deal with natural disasters?
One of the elements in that budget is a pretty robust package of hazardous tree removal. And so that is something that our staff do all the time. They're always out removing limbs or trees that they have deemed hazardous, primarily in our high use areas like campgrounds and along trails. And so this will certainly help that, especially our trails seem to be a good target for both flooding and for wind damage, like tornadoes or straight line winds, because they create this corridor that the weather just loves. And so being able to go out and remove more hazardous trees will hopefully allow us in some of those storms, not have as much cleanup as we need to in order to get those trails back open and safe for people to use.
Do you see as the risks mostly in flash flooding and tornadoes, or are there other climate events that you really have to be prepared for?
We did have an event where we had extreme cold in
Mm.
the mid 20 teens, where we actually had an incredible amount of cold. Our frost depth was
Hmm.
really, really shallow. And so we had a lot of frozen pipes and damage from cold weather as well. So we really look at everything. It's very interesting in the state of Wisconsin, though. And we definitely see how the Mississippi impacts weather in Wisconsin. And so most of the flooding actually takes place along the Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa borders. And more of the tornado elements happen to take place more in the eastern part of the state, and more specifically in the northeastern part of the state. So I don't know necessarily why that is, but it's certainly
Mm.
the Mississippi does certainly affect our weather, and we see more flooding elements along that north-south corridor along
Yeah.
Minnesota and Iowa border.
Missy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Missy Van Landit is Recreation Partnerships Section Chief for the Department of Natural Resources. We've been learning how the Wisconsin State Park System prepares for weather emergencies in light of the devastating flooding in central Texas and the ongoing search for people along the Guadalupe River.
Coming up, communities around the U.S. are converting office buildings to apartments. A Milwaukee developer tells us why the demand is there and what it takes to make it happen.
It's really complicated. The ceiling heights, the floor plates, how the elevators are located, how you're going to run plumbing. So you need a very sophisticated team and you need the right building.
That's next here on WPR News.
It's Wisconsin Today. I'm Kate Archer-Kent.
And I'm Rob Farrett. 2024 saw a record number of offices converted into housing space around the country.
The ongoing housing crisis and an increase in people working from home has sparked developers and cities to get creative in how they use existing buildings.
That trend has touched Wisconsin's biggest city with a number of projects underway to convert office buildings into homes. Tom Dakin has been following the trend as he covers development at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Tom, welcome to Wisconsin Today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I've been seeing, this trend, this idea of, hey, we've got these commercial buildings, we can convert them to residential going on around the country. I was scrolling through articles with your byline, Tom. Seems like there's a lot of this kind of action going on in the Milwaukee area. How much is this happening?
Well, Milwaukee's actually been doing this for quite a while. I would say going back, at least 15 years or so with some of our older downtown historic buildings, office buildings that were really obsolete for today's modern office users. And developers were acquiring those buildings and then converting them to apartments. Some of this being fueled by being able to obtain federal and state historic preservation tax credits, and those are basically a way to recover your costs, a certain percentage of your costs as a developer, as long as that building is renovated according to some very high standards set by the National Park Service that runs that program. Now, more lately, I think it's picked up notice because of two things. Number one, demand for office space has dropped. That's post-COVID, where more employers have embraced if not flat out remote working, certainly giving their employees flexibility from time to time or maybe on a regular basis to work remotely. And that's been coupled with strong demand for housing, particularly more affordable rental housing, which is at a premium, not just in Milwaukee, but practically every city in the United States, it seems. So naturally, if you have some office buildings that are underused, the operators of those buildings would perhaps look at redeveloping them, or in the case of 100 East, some entrepreneurial developers like Johnny Vasallo and his partners come along and they buy the building and proceed with plans to convert it to apartments.
On the office space demand side of things, Tom, we see some cities around the country where a few years back, it looked like there were ghost towns, right? There's so little action going on in some of these office buildings. Has it been that extreme in Milwaukee in the post-COVID era?
No, it really hasn't. Actually, Milwaukee has fared, and I'm not sure how much people are aware of this. I've written about it. Some of my counterparts have written about it, but Milwaukee has actually fared pretty well. And I think for a couple of fundamental reasons. Number one, we never overbuilt our office market downtown as much as maybe other cities did. And number two, I think we've done a better job of having a mix of both daytime uses downtown, such as office, and what are sometimes called nighttime uses, residential. And as a result, coming back out of COVID, I think we've had a quicker recovery compared to, say, Chicago, Minneapolis, and some other cities.
On the demand side of things for residential now, again, communities all over the state having trouble with affordable rentals and housing units for sale. Give us a sense of the rental market in Milwaukee. How much demand is there?
Well, demand is high, but the conundrum is that for developers, because of interest rates also being high, that makes it more expensive to borrow money. That's obviously one of your chief expenses when you're building anything. That, along with some inflated construction costs for both material and labor, it's made it difficult for a lot of developers to build anything other than on one end of the spectrum, obtaining tax credits, federal tax credits to develop affordable housing, where if you get those tax credits, great, but you have to restrict those units to certain below market rents for people earning typically up to 60 or maybe even 80% of the median income. That's one end of the spectrum. The other end is kind of the high end luxury market, which last year in downtown Milwaukee, we had 2 high rises open that at this point now, those are probably about half full. So there's some questions as to how strong the market is to continue to do that type of housing. And then, of course, in between, you have this segment of the market, it's sometimes referred to as workforce housing. Mm-hmm. There's no official definition of that, but I think from the city of Milwaukee's perspective, that would be apartments aimed at people earning up to the median income. So if you earn right at the median income or perhaps slightly below or slightly above, you would fall into the category of workforce housing. And I'm sure John Vasallo will talk about this more at length than I can, but part of the city financing agreement that was just reached to help pay for the 100 East conversion, which still has to undergo our common council review, that was done in part with the developers agreeing to set aside, I believe it's 75 of those units, of nearly 400 units, at below market rents for people falling into that workforce housing category.
Tom, do you get a sense that people in the business community and in city government see this missing middle zone, that workforce housing you were talking about, as a problem, right? Something that could limit economic development if businesses want to hire people, but they can't live anywhere near where they work.
Yeah, very, very clearly. I mean, if you want to develop your workforce, there are a couple of basic rules. Number one, make sure they have housing. On a completely different topic, number two, maybe don't deport them if they haven't committed any crimes. That's another show for another day. And yeah, on the former point, I think the city of Milwaukee is now taking steps to tackle that. A little slow than the slower pace that the developers would prefer, but they're doing it now. Similar to what some other communities have been doing. I wrote a story back around Memorial Day weekend that looked at 2 other Midwestern cities, Green Bay and then Des Moines, Iowa, that have been kind of pursuing this path as well, and some of the things they've been doing that perhaps Milwaukee would try and emulate.
Now, you mentioned those high interest rates being a limiting factor. Well, if I'm a developer, I got to deal with that whether I'm doing new construction or renovating an existing building. Uh, do you have a sense of like when people are evaluating putting up new housing or rehabbing an old office building, which looks better economically?
Well, on the rehabbing side, what can really help with making the economics, again, Johnny can talk to this in much more detail than I can, is obtaining those historic preservation tax credits. And there's a real interesting story about 100 East, where that building is only about 35 years old. And most buildings that are designated as historic, in order to obtain those preservation tax credits, kind of the rule of thumb is, well, you got to be 50 years old or older. But that's not a hard and fast rule, and there have been exceptions. And Johnny and his partners pursued that status. It was initially denied by the state board that oversees these things because some of the folks on the board were raising questions of essentially, well, gee, it's only 35 years old. Why should we make an exception? And they came back and made a stronger, more detailed case the second time around, and they got that approval. And in a nutshell, the case being made was, look, it's only 35 years old, but for the postmodern architectural style, this is a really, really good example. And for your listeners who are familiar with this building, it's right in the heart of downtown. It has these interesting exterior accoutrements, archways that are sort of designed to both emulate City Hall, which is not that far away, as well as the building that used to be there, which was called, I think it was called the Pabst Building. It was an office building that was built in the late 19th century and then eventually torn down. And that's a big key for the developers to be able to get those tax credits to help defray some of their costs. That I think really helps make the finances work. And now more lately, you're getting the city involved with the tax incremental financing district. And basically what that does is it takes a portion of the property tax revenue that wouldn't otherwise exist that's generated by this new development, and it uses that to help pay for part of the cost of converting the underused, nearly unused office building into nearly 400 apartments.
Tom, as we wrap up with you, you mentioned, we don't have this bumper crop of vacant commercial buildings in Milwaukee like some cities around the country do. Is there enough in projects like the ones we're talking about to put a dent in the demand for residential, that workplace housing we were talking about?
Well, from my perspective, as someone who covers development, I think you just need more housing, particularly affordable housing. And whether that comes in the forms of converting a building like 100 East into apartments, or whether it comes from building from the ground up, do both. We just had a very contentious debate a few days ago. This is being taped on July 10th. But it was in front of our Common Council Zoning Committee about a new project that will build around 200 affordable apartments over on the far northwest side of Milwaukee near the former Northridge Mall. And it was narrowly approved, recommended for approval by our zoning committee. It has to go before the full Common Council on July 15th. And again, the advocates for that project are saying, look, we appreciate some of the concerns the neighbors have. They don't like the loss of some wooded area that's going to occur, among other things. But we need more housing, period. Something that I think everyone agrees on. And God, it's a basic element of the law of supply and demand. If you want to try and mitigate against cost increase of any product, including housing, increase your supply.
Tom, thanks again for joining us today.
You bet. Enjoyed it.
That's Tom Dakin. He covers commercial development for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. We'll get a first-hand look now with Johnny Vassallo, developer working on converting that Milwaukee office building we've been talking about into housing. Johnny, thanks a lot for joining us today.
Oh, glad to be here. Tom did a great job. Really insightful.
He's a good reporter. I like talking to him. Now, Johnny, you are working on this 100 East office tower project that Tom was just talking about. What attracted you and your partners to this to say, yes, this is an office building that has potential for a residential conversion?
Hey, I love Milwaukee and I love what's happening downtown Milwaukee. So always looking. We have Mo's Place for Steaks right across the river there. So I noticed that they had a group out of California that was struggling, and Michael Best was going to leave to what Tom kind of referenced. Super class A new office is really in vogue. And when Hunter Lease lost their main tenant, Michael Best and Friedrich, um, the building went into receivership, and we started pursuing it there.
What's the starting point for saying, hey, we're going to do this redevelopment? It's a big building. A lot goes into it. What is the starting point to turn that from a notion into reality?
I think understanding the market and being local. I mean, we're here, and Milwaukee is a dynamic community, with probably by percentage some of the largest amounts of residential downtown, which makes it very vibrant, and it's attracting, in my opinion, a lot of corporate headquarters here. So the newer buildings are getting full. We do need more housing all the way across Milwaukee. So we looked at it and just started underwriting it. We were able to acquire the building, and attracted some capital here to do that, and got the bank set up, and then teamed up with the Kleins, who have a great history of putting deals like this together. And we have the experience of, in 15 and 16, we did a historical rehab that also involved TIF, of the Posner building, which became MKE Lofts.
Now, I know back, especially in the early days of COVID, when we had some cities around the country with those vacant office buildings, and it sounded like an easy solution to turn office buildings into residential. But on a physical level, the plumbing, the HVAC for office buildings is just laid out differently than residential. How big of a challenge is that? What kind of things do you have to do to convert those systems, those functions, into a place where people are living?
Yeah, from the outside, it always seems easy, right? You already have the building, so it's like, oh, this should be really easy, right? We'll just make it into apartments. But it's really complicated. The ceiling heights, the floor plates, how the elevators are located, how you're going to run plumbing. So you need a very sophisticated team, and you need the right building. And then you need to work with people who have done this before. I don't think that, without the Kleins helping, and teaming up with all of us being a team, and then hiring the right professionals. We're really lucky to have some very sophisticated subcontractors here in the city of Milwaukee that have done some of this work. So it definitely takes a complex team and some good leadership. We have Oxland helping us. Total Comfort has been extremely helpful. And then obviously the Kleins and SCB Architects have just done a tremendous job working on the complexities of making all these things happen, having the right amenities. Like I said, getting the elevators to work right, getting the plumbing in the right places. So super complex.
Johnny, I want to talk about this building and the historical designation here. Am I a little offended that a building younger than I am is being called historical? Maybe, but talk about the historical significance of the 100 East office tower and the look that you're going to be preserving.
Well, I think that something I'm super passionate about and excited about is my uncle was running DCD when this building was built, and he was very aggressive with how that building was going to look, and that it would reflect the historical significance of that corner. So, first trading post in the city of Milwaukee. And then, the Pabst building was there, and it was very historic. And the developers tore it down. And when they were allowed to rebuild it, it had to have a lot of postmodern, significant historical attributes. And so the building is one of a kind. To me, it's the prettiest building in the city. I've been looking at it for over 40 years. I'm much older than that, but since I was in high school, it's been there. And so I think it started in 2006. I know Tom said 35 years. We'd lean that it's closer to 40 years, but the beauty, the adaptation to, as he suggested, City Hall and the old Pabst building, I think really makes it a star of the downtown district.
Johnny, I want to wrap up by asking about the timeline. This doesn't sound like something that is going to happen fast. When, if things all go well, when would people be renting these units?
We'd like to see if we can get through the Common Council and get this TIF passed in the next, 30 to 60 days. We'd like to see, demo and construction start, Q4, and then be renting 2 years from now, and hopefully fully rented in less than 4 years. So it'll be an asset to Milwaukee in very short order, and we look forward to having 500 or 600 new Milwaukeeans or Milwaukeeans that are here already looking to upgrade, living downtown. Very exciting.
We'll leave it there. Johnny, thanks a lot for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Johnny Vassallo is a Milwaukee commercial real estate developer and restaurateur. He is one of the partners redeveloping the 35-story 100 East office tower in Milwaukee to have more than 350 apartments in it. Earlier, we heard from Tom Dakin, who reports on commercial development for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Well, wherever you are in the state, have you seen this happen, taking a building for commercial or maybe even industrial use in the past and turning it into residential? Maybe it's a big building like the one we've been talking about, maybe something smaller. We'd love to hear what you are seeing in your community. If you think there's room for more of this kind of thing, you could email wisconsintoday@wpr.org. That's wisconsintoday@wpr.org.
Still ahead on Wisconsin Today, a pair of kidney donors in Wisconsin give their organs to a stranger. Find out what it was like to be a living donor.
Being an altruistic living kidney donor is the most amazing experience of your life. And you can live a normal, healthy life after you recover.
That story is next from WPR News. It's Wisconsin Today. I'm Kate Archer-Kent.
And I'm Rob Farrett. More than 1,200 people in Wisconsin are waiting for a life-saving kidney transplant, which makes up 80% of the people waiting for an organ here in the state. That's according to the nation's Organ Transplant System Network.
While many kidney donations come from deceased donors, some people make the decision to become living kidney donors, even if they don't know who the organ might go to.
Congress is considering legislation that would give a refundable tax credit for 5 years to people who donate a kidney to a stranger. The End Kidney Deaths Act is supported by a bipartisan group of House lawmakers, including 2 from Wisconsin.
We're joined by 2 people who donated kidneys in Wisconsin. Mike Crawley is CEO of the National Kidney Foundation of Wisconsin. He donated his kidney in January. Andrea Weissman is on the foundation's board and a spokesperson for the organization Kidneys for Kids. She donated her kidney last December. Mike and Andrea, welcome to Wisconsin Today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Andrea, how did you come to the decision to become an undirected living kidney donor?
Well, my journey actually began in 2015. I survived a near fatal car accident. And had I needed somebody to be a donor and offer that life-saving gift to me, I would have had to rely on a stranger. And at the time, I myself was not a registered donor on my license. And I can tell you that was really the jumpstart of everything. I made sure that I, put that orange sticker on my license. It was a really trying time for me in 2015 too. I had a lot of personal things going on, and my son was 3 at the time. So having to be taken care of for almost 4 months, 24/7 by my parents and take care of a child was, a scary thing. And I chose rather than being a victim, to be a survivor and to figure out how I could get my life together and make a difference in the world, because I was fortunate enough to get a second chance at life, and I knew that I could not take that for granted. Fast forward a few years, I've had some very special people come into my life, and I really truly do believe that God puts people in my path for a reason, and that reason was to tell other people's stories. About a year and a half ago, I had a young family reach out to me, and a mom said, my young son is kind of knocking on death's door, and his only chance at life is to get a kidney transplant. And I said, okay, well, what can I do? And she said, can you help me share my story? And that's exactly what I did. Took to social media. We held fundraisers. We had people line up in droves to test for this young kid. And I'm happy to say that he did receive his gift of life last year on April 16th. And he really has been my inspiration. 2 days after he had received that gift of life, I went and got tested and just decided I am just going to give my kidney to anyone that needs it because I can. And I went through all that testing, which is very grueling, but it's well worth it. And I really had to come to terms with the fact that if I was not going to be eligible, that I at least was going to be able to speak on the experience. And that's really what I wanted. But lo and behold, I was eligible. And, it was really a time where I was like, all right, buckle up. We're going to do this. On Halloween of last year, my profile went live on the National Kidney Registry. And within 24 hours, I was matched with someone.
Wow. 24 hours.
Yeah, my life pretty much changed in 24 hours. I was in it to win it, and there was no way that I was going to back out because I knew that once that person matched with me, they were depending on me.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that story. Turning to you, Mike, what was your journey like?
Well, being the CEO of National Kidney Foundation of Wisconsin the past 4.5 years, I had the privilege to go to 3 dialysis clinics last March. And I was distributing care bags to the patients there that were on dialysis. And the whole idea was to improve their mood and let them know that people care and give them something and some hope. Well, when I walked into the first one in Milwaukee, I was stunned. Hearing the machines running, seeing people sleeping, knowing that they're there 2, 4, 6 hours a day, every other day practically, to continue life. And I get to my truck when I left, and I went to post my experience on social media, and I cried. I cried because I realized that could be me. It could be a family member. It could be a good friend. I went to the next one. Same experience. I went to the next one. And that was my trigger. That third walkthrough of a dialysis clinic, passing out 100 bags, triggered me into thinking, you know what? Here I am advocating for this. And, well, what am I doing more? What more can I do? So that was March. Last year was a big year for me. I turned 60 years old on August 3rd. And that is a specific date that I'll always remember because I pedaled my bike 102 miles in 3 states. And I got off my bike that day and I realized, boy, am I healthy. I got off the bike like I didn't do a thing the whole day. And I put 2 and 2 together that I wanted to do something really big and impactful in my life to help a fellow human in a more direct way than just donating blood. And I thought, when I get back to work, I should log on and see if I can be a living kidney donor. So
you know how it works. You know the drill.
Yes, I do. So I went through that process, and on August 5th, I applied. Then fast forward through those next several months, numerous interviews, over the phone, Zoom, and then on October 16th, I was invited in for an all-day physical, psychosocial assessment, blood panel, urine, the whole works, the most extensive physical you get in your life. I was there for 8 hours, 13 appointments. And it was all done real time through the day. So I knew where I stood in this evaluation process. And it was excellent candidate, excellent candidate, excellent candidate. Here I am, 60 years old, and I am going to be an excellent candidate to be a living donor. December 2nd was when I was given a call and asked, do you want to go forward? Everything's all set. And I said yes. 2 days later, less than 48 hours, they found a match. And the match was in Wisconsin.
Wow.
Could have been anywhere in the country, but it was in Wisconsin. I donated on January 8th. I was released 2 days later. It was a great experience. Giving the gift of life, giving somebody hope and not needing anything in return. And I ended up finding out the chain. The chain number was 4. So I ended up saving 4 people's lives by starting that chain. Another thing I want to share with you that's kind of a bonus with all of this that people don't know about altruistic living kidney donation is you receive vouchers. You can receive up to 5 vouchers through the National Kidney Registry. Those vouchers can be assigned to your immediate family members. And if at any time in their life they need a kidney, they are moved to the top of the transplant list nationwide, and they'll receive a living kidney donation. Only one can be activated, not all 5. Your hope is that they never need one, but statistics show that there is a likelihood. And if you have uncontrolled hypertension, which is high blood pressure, type 1, type 2 diabetes, over the age of 60, there are many other risk factors and so forth, but if you have any of those in your family, there's a chance that a family member may need it. And our son has type 1 diabetes. So he has a 50% chance in his lifetime of kidney failure. So I assigned a voucher to him, and it's a way to protect your family. And when people ask, well, why would you donate a kidney to a stranger when maybe you want to donate to your family member? Well, you may not be a match. And I don't need to be a match. Andrea didn't need to be a match to a family member. We donated to somebody else, and in return, there is that voucher program.
We're talking with 2 undirected living kidney donors in Wisconsin. Mike Crawley, CEO of the National Kidney Foundation of Wisconsin. Andrea Weissman serves on the foundation's board, and in recent months, they both made a life-changing kidney donation to an unknown recipient, and they're sharing their experience. I wonder, Andrea, what was the recovery process like for you? And were you at all concerned about, what was coming after that surgery?
Going into the surgery was literally like any other day of my life. I walked into the OR, laid down, woke up, and they were like, "Hey, it was great." Like with any surgical procedure, and everyone's being different, it was a little bit of a roller coaster. But I knew at the end of the day that I was going to be okay. I was in the best shape of my life prior to, which was my intention to be able to recover quickly. And honestly, all I cared about is that my recipient was thriving.
Mike, how was recovery for you?
It was excellent. The whole experience, a perfect 10. Could not have asked for anything to go any different. My recovery was 6 weeks. They asked that you stay home and recover well and heal. So I did. And, there are barriers with being a living kidney donor. Workplaces may not allow the time and so forth. So not only from a physical standpoint, you're worried, but you're worried about your financial situation at home and so forth. But there's what's called Donor Shield, and Donor Shield makes a big difference. They'll reimburse you for mileage, hotel, any travel expense, loss of wages through that period of time that you're recovering. But my recovery was amazing. I am back doing everything that I've done before. Matter of fact, I'm a big-time bicyclist. I ride a couple thousand miles every year, and back on May 4th, my first bike ride was 41 miles.
Are you a changed CEO?
Absolutely. I truly have lived the mission of our organization. Being an altruistic living kidney donor is the most amazing experience of your life. And you can live a normal, healthy life after you recover.
Andrea, have you been able to be in contact with the person who received your kidney?
Yes, she's absolutely wonderful. In this situation, they are in control of whether or not they want to reach out to their donor. I was very lucky that she answered my letters. We have been able to meet twice, including actually last night. And we have now become family, and her friends have become my family. And, I didn't do this to actually know who I was helping. It did not matter to me. But I am very, very, very fortunate and lucky that I was able to meet mine, and she is thriving.
That's beautiful. And Mike, for you?
I have heard from my recipient through a letter. All this is done confidentially through the transplant centers. And the correspondence program allows you to communicate back and forth, and you can stop at any time. And when you go through this whole process, the psychosocial assessment, they ask you what your thoughts are of hearing from your recipient. Would you like to? And, when you give the gift of life the way we did, we don't need to know. But yes, it is pretty cool if we do get that opportunity. And so I did receive a letter. I do know the details of why the person needed a kidney. It's amazing. The gratefulness in the letter was shown. I had tears in my eyes as I read this to my wife. That's all I need. If I never meet this person, that's okay. Knowing that there was a chain started was all I really needed at that time as well. And you, as an altruistic living kidney donor, can start a chain and save several people's lives. It's not just the donor or the recipient that you're donating to.
I do want to ask you, in Congress, House lawmakers circulating a bill called the End Kidney Deaths Act, which would provide a $10,000 refundable tax credit every year for 5 years to living kidney donors who donate kidneys to strangers. What do you make of this legislation and a financial incentive for donating?
I think it's a great thing. National Kidney Foundation is in support of that act, as well as me personally. It somewhat incentivizes people, but it's really meant to cover expenses. Like I said, Donor Shield provides coverage for most that you would need. But it's just another opportunity to get more people to consider, is how I look at it.
Mike and Andrea, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Mike Crawley is CEO of the National Kidney Foundation of Wisconsin. Andrea Weissman serves on the foundation's board. They both donated a kidney to an unknown recipient, and we learned what that experience was like for them. Last week, after a segment on drinking and health, we asked for your thoughts on the alcohol culture here in Wisconsin.
Kat sent us an email. Kat writes, I moved here in 2005 from California. When my Wisconsin boyfriend compared the number of bars per capita in California versus Wisconsin, he found that Wisconsin not only had more bars per person, it had more bars. Now, I double-checked the current numbers. Wisconsin has the most bars per capita. California does have more bars total than we do now.
And Kat continues, I really like not drinking. Wisconsin has an amazing mocktail culture, and I don't miss the feeling of being slightly ill for several hours.
And Kat writes, all I need now is for the Scots to develop an NA Lagavulin Scotch.
Thanks for sharing your story, Kat. You can share your thoughts and experiences with Wisconsin's drinking culture. Email wisconsintoday@wpr.org to tell us about it, or call or text. Either way, the number is 888-642-0232. Wisconsin Today producers include Trevor Hook, Joe Tarr, and Beatrice Lawrence. Our technical directors are Sarah Hopeful and Tyler Ditter. Learn more about us at wpr.org/Wisconsin Today. I'm Kate Archer-Kent.
And I'm Rob Farrett. You're listening to WPR News.